I'll try that.
Yeah. Yeah, any comments will show up right there.
We have trouble with it shutting down, because we're going from an open session to a closed session.
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause I do with this.
Stop recording.
no, no.
John, you didn't take my report.
Oh, yes.
It's already right.
Andrew, what's the Wi-Fi? He wants to know the Wi-Fi.
Oh, I gotta write it down, it's a long password.
Oh,
Okay, well, that's all right.
That's,
it's the Bears are where it's at. Is that it?
yeah.
Good. But there's something more to it. Bears are where it's at.
Are you still on that? Don't have done?
Is Tom Cox's thing there objection?
Yeah, I was gonna read it.
Okay, I might look at it later.
It's just the what, Bears are where it's at, proper punctuation and spacing.
Is it on his
Yeah. That it's pot-tastic.
Oh, I see that.
Here's an extra copy, Lyle.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's
Okay, that's all
quite
I
the
need. That's all
password.
I need.
No,
So-
I'm not.
That's to be grammatically correct.
Correct.
There's two.
All right, I'll see if anybody's down there.
Jim, do we have people identify themselves in the room? Going on the room?
Well, that's up to you. I mean, you're gonna know these folks. I don't do it that way.
Okay, I guess we'll, time to open the hearing of the Vanman Levy DeSoto project to look at the engineer's report and get objections and so forth. So right now, I'm Lyle McIntosh, the chairman of Vanman. We got John Doty right here and Dan Hoyt right over there. We've got Jim Hudson from the Hudson Law Firm, Pocahontas, Iowa. And we have John Rosengren with Bolton and Mink, and also Colin with Bolton and Mink. And then we've got Scott Bell and the
Groby.
Lynn Groby, and several others here in our audience. So we'll, Jim, I guess we'll start the hearing, and you want to lead it off with a little bit of information
Sure.
you have for the folks?
One of the things we do, Lyle, I'm used to having a sign-in sheet, so you get an accurate list of everybody that's here.
I have it right over.
one right here.
And I usually sign in so I get paid. I want a record
Wish
that.
that worked for me.
Yeah, me too.
That's the first course in law school.
How to bill?
Yeah.
Billing's easy, it's collecting's the tough part.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow, I'm Jim Hudson from Pocahontas. My firm has been doing drainage for many years. My father started in the early 50s, and I went to started practicing in 76 with him, and have carried on. My father died in 2010, so now it's up to me. So what I like to do, I said that to say this, I would go to drainage hearings with my father, and there were two people in the room, maybe there'd be 100 people. There were two people in the room that knew what was going on. My dad and the engineer. The supervisors or trustees didn't know, the auditors didn't know, the landowners didn't know, the contractors didn't know, and I said, Dad, nobody knew what was going on. He says, well, that's all right, that's the way we always do things. I said, well, that's Einstein's definition of stupidity. To do things the same way you've always done it and expect a different result. So I determined when I started doing this and I was in charge and my dad was driving me to these meetings, I developed this outline. I call it Drainage 101. And I'm gonna just move through this very quickly. All of you people in the room deserve to know some drainage law and procedure, particularly the landowners. We don't have a lot of landowners. Show of hands, show me landowners today. So we have
Interested landowners or just landowners?
that are in the district, or any kind of landowner that gets involved in drainage. So not a lot of folks have been through, I call it drainage, not levy. It's the title of the code section is drainage and levee law, so it's combined. So at any rate, I want to buzz right through this. Interrupt me if you have questions.
Jim, quick question. I was supposed to, Melvin thought I should give the folks on the phones a chance to, or should I do that
To
after?
check in.
Yeah, to check in, or,
Well, you know, it's up to you,
Yeah.
but just so you'll know who else is listening in, you can see.
Are they
who's
on
here.
and can they hear?
can anybody hear us speaking on the phones to see if they're working okay? And if you'd like, you can identify yourself.
This is
Lyle,
Liz.
John Kalachi here. I can hear you just fine.
Okay, thank you. Good to see you, John.
Frank Wagner's in the room with me.
Okay, hi, Frank. Okay,
I'm gonna go
Liz
back to
Lenz
mute.
from Harrison County.
okay, thank you.
Is that Liz?
You got
Hey, Lyle,
Tom
what-
Cox from DeSoto National Wildlife Refuge.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
So can you folks on the phone hear me?
Yes.
Can just fine, yes, but I'm gonna go back to mute so you don't hear me unless you speak to me.
Okay,
How's that?
you do it how you normally manage it.
All right.
And I'm sorry you folks don't have my outline, but I'll go through it and it'll maybe raise some questions and hopefully answer questions you have. So the parties to a drainage project are the supervisors as trustees or the trustees. In either way, you function as trustees. The trustee by definition manages property for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So the trustees manage Vanman DD30 for the benefit of the landowners. Secondly, we have auditors as clerk. Melvin Hauser is the auditor and Linda Swally is drainage clerk. All of the records of all of the levee districts and drainage districts in Pont County are kept in the auditor's office. Even if it's a trustee's district and you meet out at somebody's machine shed, you still get the records into the auditor. So it's permanent storage of all the records, everything. It's a public record, so whoever wants to look at those records can get in and do it. Different auditors have different policies about copying those records. But I know Melvin and Linda, and they're very good to work with, so if you want to get something from the auditor's office, they'll get it to you. The engineer, every time there's a project, the Iowa Code requires, it's not a suggestion, it requires that a competent, and John and Colin are competent engineers, be hired to do an investigation, to make a survey, and make and file a written report, which Bolton and Mink has done. This is that written report. I would encourage everybody to pick up a copy here or at the auditor's office or go online and get it if you have electronic smarts and capability. I don't, so they hand me one by paper.
Well, let me make a point that we don't have that online yet.
Yeah, John
But we
said
will
that.
get- But we will get that online as soon as John can get it to Linda and he'll put it on our website.
We'll make it available to all you landowners. They hired me as attorney to represent the district in this proceeding. If things move forward, and I anticipate they will let out bids and hire a contractor. The contractor's a party to the drainage. And then the last party is you landowners. You don't really own this levee district, but I call you stakeholders. You are the most interested party in the procedure. The district exists for your benefit, and you need to have a good understanding of everything and good input into whatever occurs in your district. And if you don't, you have elections every probably 3 years, and you can get new trustees if you can find anybody to run for it. That's becoming more and more and more of a problem. If you get tired of trustees, you can turn it back over to Pont County, and the supervisors would manage the district. Number two, a petition. The way to initiate activity in a drainage district is two ways. Number one is any landowner can file a petition. What the petition says is not magic. It doesn't need to be lawyer weasel words. It just needs to say, I'm in this levy district, I'm assessed for benefits, and I need better flood protection. It doesn't need to be technical, because quite frankly, the landowner doesn't know the problem. The problem will be sorted out by the engineer. So that petition is filed with the auditor, who gets it to the trustees. Then the trustees, like I said, are required by law to appoint an engineer. He's required by law to do an investigation and a survey. By survey, I don't mean go measure the district. I mean he talks to people in the district to see where the problems are. Files his report. Today is the very first date and time that any decision can be made with respect to any project. This is the very first hearing. No decision can be made until you get notice mailed to you and published of this hearing. And I have a copy of that. And this asks you to come to the hearing. So no decision has been made other than there's some strange language in the drainage code that every once in a while landowners pick up on that says the report's been approved. Well, John Rosengren brings it to the courthouse and hands it to the auditor and the trustees. And if I hand this to Lyle and he takes it from me, that's what that means. He hasn't read it and he hasn't made a decision to approve what's in it because he can't until we have this hearing. That's really bad code language. So if you're tinkering with the code, John, there's one for you. But anyhow, it comes up and people think that there's already been some decision made by the time they get to today's hearing. Nothing's been decided other than to appoint an engineer and appoint an attorney and to figure out the date to have the hearing. Also, if the trustees become aware of a problem, and generally they do, they can trigger activity with an engineer without a petition. You don't have to have a petition. The trustees just contact Bolton and Mink to go out and investigate. I think Troy Groth was doing work before, and he got kind of hung up, and so they put Bolton and Mink in place. And also triggering this a bit is John was with a group, Erickson now, that worked hard with the state government to get some money to fix problems that you have with facilities on the river. And the money became available, so time is of the essence to move forward with making repairs. Number three, hearings. I like drainage procedure because there are a lot of hearings. So there's a lot of involvement. There's a lot of opportunity for landowner input at these hearings. The hearings are all public. Everything's done in public. Nothing is done in a smoke-filled room at Lyle McIntosh's farm. It's all out in the open, and it's a public hearing. And everybody can attend, and everybody can watch, and everybody can see what's going on. So today is the hearing on the initial report. Other hearings that might and probably will occur is right-of-way acquisition, annexation, bid letting, completion hearing, reclassification, and common outlet. Those are the potential hearings under the drainage code. The only thing we're doing today is the hearing on the initial report and would make a decision on repairs. In the engineer's report, the next letter, the definition of a repair. A repair is mandatory by the drain code. It says that the trustees shall keep all district facilities in a good state of repair and maintenance. What repair means is to restore and maintain district facilities to its original design capacity and its original design efficiency. This levee was designed and built in about the early 40s, from 43 to 46. And that is the design by the original engineer that is considered to be a repair. That's important because the procedure is a little different for repairs than it is for an improvement. And also what you can and cannot do with respect to a number of regulations that we work with. Wetlands, NRCS deals, I'll get lost, but Army Corps of Engineers, permitting, repairs are a little different from improvements. Repairs are mandatory. If every landowner in the district files an objection today and resists repairs, the trustees still are required by law to make the repairs suggested by the engineer. It's not permissive. They have to do it. It is the only instance when these trustees, when Vanman Levee District can be sued, the landowners can sue the trustees to force them in court to make the recommended repairs. That's the only time. And I go all over the state and people say, oh, we're going to get sued. And I'll say, no, you're not. You can't be. Recent big case that caught a lot of press was Des Moines Waterworks. That case reaffirmed over 100 years of drainage law that drainage and levee districts can't be sued. Now, that doesn't mean that these three fellows up here as trustees can't be personally liable. And I know there was a fellow going around here a few years ago, I met at Roger Clark's house. And they were selling insurance to everybody. Scott was there, I think. And I said, there's no reason for you to get insurance unless you do something illegal. Well, what is a drainage district or a levee district? Are you going to make moonshine on your levee and pump it through your tile? That would be illegal. And if you guys do that, you probably deserve to be sued because these landowners don't want their facility used like that unless they get a little moonshine. So anyhow, you can't be sued. Too long an explanation, but at least you'll know that. You can win an argument at the tavern tonight. An improvement, different from a repair. An improvement is to expand, enlarge, or increase the capacity of a district facility. Extend its life. Many of you are farmers. You know the difference if you're going to overhaul a tractor to call it a repair versus put a new engine in. The IRS wants you to call that a depreciable capital asset. Kind of the same difference. When you shingle your barn, it's a repair. If you put new rafters and substrate and all sorts of things and you extend it and raise it, now you've improved your barn. It's just common sense. Annexation. There is a blurb in the engineer's report about annexation. That's not happening today, and it may or may not happen in the future. Anytime that the board is told that there is land outside the assessment boundaries of the district that benefits from district facilities, the benefit has to be material. Material means actual, not perceived, real, not imaginary. When there's an actual benefit, I'm not saying how big the benefit is or how good the benefit is. We don't quantify or qualify the benefit. It's just that there is a benefit.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Andrew's downstairs for overflow. There's nobody there. Is it all right, Lyle and guys, if he leaves, or do you want to keep somebody down there for anybody else that shows up?
Looks like we got a few chairs left here for.
Okay, is it all right if he bugs out?
I think so.
Fine with me.
Okay.
I was told that Scott Belt was going to be at the door to usher me in personally. He was up here chewing, rolling the cow.
All right, I just wanted to check with you guys since you're in charge, so I'll let Andrew know he can leave. Thanks for letting me interrupt.
Oh, you're fine. Do it again if you have a question.
All right.
So annexation is talked about The notice you got has a numbered paragraph that says annexation may be considered at a different date. If we're going to do that, the trustees will send the engineer back out to do a report for annexation. He'll study in greater detail and make an annexation report. And before this district annexes any land, all of the people to be annexed will be notified by mail and by publication, and their land identified. That's roughly the procedure. The story I tell about annexation is kind of like the neighborhood bully who sees the little girl eating a sucker, and he walks down the block and he says to the little girl, "I want your sucker. We can do this two ways. You can resist me and I'll beat you up and take your sucker, or you can just hand it to me and you can hip hop all the way home." That's what annexation's like. We just tell the landowners, you're coming in either on an involuntary basis or a voluntary basis because you've been getting a benefit. You landowners should like annexation because it means that these people out on the fringe are receiving benefits that they've never been assessed for. Once we annex new lands in, we can assess the new lands for current benefits, like this repair project we're about to do, or even past benefits if they should have been in the district from the establishment back in 1946. And we can go clear back if we have good records and assess them a part of the benefits that other landowners have paid. We rarely do that. We've tried it a couple times and we don't have good enough records to do that. There's really not a reason to. Right-of-way acquisition. The drainage districts and levee districts have the authority if they discover they need additional land for their facilities. Go ahead, John.
You know, you talked about annexation. You didn't mention the fact that it had to be reclassified before you make those assessments to property that are outside.
Yeah, you're a good point, John. There's another, every time you do an annexation, you're supposed to reclassify the whole district. But if I annex your farm and your farm is just exactly like mine, and I'm paying certain benefits, they can have you just pay the same benefits without going through that whole procedure. But it's really better if you bring in a lot of land to go through a reclassification. And I'm going to talk about reclassification next. But right-of-way acquisition, the district can acquire additional right-of-way. That is a relatively simple procedure. We can acquire it by negotiating for a deed conveyance. What we want is a permanent easement for right-of-way. That's the nature of our holding. That's the nature of what we have now and what we would want in the future. So number one, we can negotiate that and get it by deed. Number two, we can use Chapter 6B of the Iowa Code, which is the condemnation procedure that's used by cities, DOT. If they want to widen their highways, they use that procedure. Ours is much simpler and easier. It's in the code. I don't want to go into any detail. Right-of-way acquisition is mentioned that we may need some more right-of-way. We'll wait and see. And that's another numbered paragraph says that will happen after, if we do a right-of-way acquisition, the auditor appoints an assessment committee, which is the engineer and two disinterested landowners. They make a report, they suggest a price, and we hold a hearing with notice, published and mailed to the landowner we're going to acquire additional right-of-way from. It's a very good procedure and it works well. We're not doing that today and we may or may not do it in the future. Depends upon what we discover as we go forward. Reclassification. When drainage and levee districts are established, there is an assessment schedule that starts. That assessment schedule in this instance was developed in 1946, and you've been operating under that one ever since. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, all the engineers in the state changed the way that they did assessments. Initially, they only used one factor. And my example is if I'm on a 5-mile long drainage ditch, I'll pick on John because I know him better than anybody else. And John's farm is clear down at the end of the ditch, right when it goes into the river. He uses the last 50 feet of the ditch. My farm is 5 miles up at the top of the ditch, and my water travels 5 miles through the district ditch before it even gets to John's, and then it leaves into the river. So back in the day, for the first 60 to 70 years of drainage in the state, John and I would have the same exact assessment. Grossly unfair to John. He didn't use much of the ditch. His water doesn't silt the whole thing in like mine does. It doesn't erode it. He doesn't need it. So they changed their methodology. We won't go into it today, but today they use 4 or 5 factors, such as topography. If there's slope on my ground, my water can come off and go into the ditch.
I haven't seen anything.
Soil types. Different types of soil have different need for drainage and to release their water. Do you have Okoboji and Nicollet and Webster and all that? They've got totally different soils over here by the river. You got sand, sandier, and more sand, don't you? Kinda. But different soils in the county have different needs for drainage. Then how much of the ditch do you use? John and I. So all those different factors go in to determine. The only guidance that the classification commission has. I wish it had 50 bullet points and they check those off, but it doesn't. It just says the engineers define the parcel of land in the district with the highest need for drainage and the parcel with the lowest need for drainage. One gets 100, one gets a 0, and they compare in between. Now out here in flooding area, I'm thinking that most land has kind of a similar propensity to flood. So you could have fairly equal assessments in levee districts. There is a code provision. Now, I know Larry Buss is on the phone. There's a code provision that allows you to assess on the tax assessed valuation and make equal per acre. That's not allowed in the rest of the code. But we did do that recently up north of here in the Rand Peterson. Tim Tiemeyer worked, I don't know how he got it done, but he did a marvelous job of setting that system up. And I think it's worked well, and I think it was well received by the landowners. So that's not happening now either, but it might in the future. The other thing is, with respect to assessments, is we anticipate that this project will be paid for entirely by monies available from the state of Iowa, about $3 million we estimate, and or some FEMA money, Federal Emergency Management, to repair damage to the levee. Objections. The notice you got said you must object in writing, or one of the consequences is you lose your opportunity to appeal the district court in Pottawatomie County. So if you don't file a written objection, we don't know what your concerns are. I like objections so I can read the concerns, and it gives us something to talk about and vet at these hearings. But you must file a written objection. You may do so anytime before the trustees make a final decision. The code says at or before the hearing. Well, now we're at the hearing, and while we're still in the hearing doesn't end until it's closed. Hearings can be continued from time to time if there's a need. Don't think that'll happen, but it could. So if you think of something today that you want to object to, you may write it out on a piece of paper. It doesn't need to be fancy words. You can just say, too much money won't do any good, don't like Jim Hudson socks. That's not a very good one to show to a judge. So at any rate, objections are important. If you do file an objection and the board makes a decision that you don't like, you have the right to appeal that decision to district court in Pot County within 20 days of their ruling. I will take the objections today, read and review all of them, and today is the best day to discuss an objection because we have the engineer in the room, number of landowners, the trustees, and me to try to answer the questions you have. Second page, I'm trying to move. John, would this be somewhere in the range of the 40th or 50th time you've heard this?
Probably 50.
He damn near has it memorized, but I change it up once in a while to interest John. Remonstrance. This is a repair, and so a remonstrance does not apply. A remonstrance applies to establishing an original drainage district or levee district, and it applies to an improvement. Simply stated, a remonstrance is if more than 50% of the landowners by population who also, you gotta have more than 50%, plus that more than 50% also has to own more than 70% of the landowners object. If they object, then the project can't go through if it's an improvement or it's to establish a new district. This is one of the reasons that most of our drainage districts and levee districts are too small. Most were established around the turn of the century until World War I. This one was a little later. But it's small on purpose because people really want a drainage ditch down in the valley. They have flooding. So they didn't include their neighbors up on the hill because their neighbors up on the hill didn't want to pay for it. Because their water ran down the hill and got into the valley whether they were in a drainage district or not. We have 3,500 drainage districts in the state of Iowa. Every time I say a drainage district, I'm including levee. I know I made people mad 10 years ago, but anyhow, every time we do a project, it seems like we're annexing more land into it because of that very thing. Because now what has happened, the folks up on the hill, they were just grazing. Well, not anymore, they're row cropping. And their water's coming off the hill or going into tile, getting into our ditches and our tiles, and so we usually expand districts whenever we do a project. Assessments. You're not going to pay an assessment we don't think. If these monies don't cover everything, it'll be assessed back to the landowners. Every single dollar spent in a drainage or levee district is paid for by the landowners. Nobody outside the district pays for anything. So I told you, you determine your relative benefits. Once the project is completed, it's levied and you pay it about the same way you pay your real estate taxes. Now I know in talking to Lyle that this district does a small assessment from time to time to have a little money in the pot for some maintenance. And that's a good idea. So they don't overburden Melvin and Linda with sending out assessments every year. So I'm a proponent of having a little money in the kitty for maintenance and repairs. We're always spraying ditches, cutting down small trees. I think you need to get weeds and trees and things off your levees. And so you always have some maintenance that needs to be done.
Jim, can I make a statement there briefly? An example that after the 11 flood, and of course before that, all the levees up and down the river had tree problems. A lot of them did because of the decades of no flooding and so forth. So, however, when we did get FEMA help in 11, they did state to us very clearly, unless we had our levee looking really good, we would not have FEMA help again. So that's why we embarked on that program.
And that's, I know listening to Larry Buss at that hearing we had up north, Larry says that trees grow up, they die, and the roots rot, and then where the roots were, form a nice capillary for water to get into the levee. So you gotta get them out of there so they don't undermine your levee. If you do get assessed, here's how you pay your assessments. 3 different ways. One, all up front, and this is for each 40-acre parcel or smaller. All up front, the same time you pay your taxes. Or half in the fall, half in the spring. That's the same way a lot of you pay your taxes. You can choose that for each one of your 40-acre tracts. The third way, the trustee.
Who makes that choice? These guys?
The landowners.
The landowner, okay.
Landowners do.
Right.
And then they come and talk to you and say, here's how I want to do it. And they'll have their assessment. And the third way is the trustees have to approve this, but if your assessment is more than $500, you can elect waivers to waive those first 2 methods and pay in not less than 10 nor more than 20-year installments. But the board determines the length of time. It can't be less than 10 and it can't be more than 20. At the same time, the board puts an interest rate on that. The board needs an interest rate for every single district, for every single new project. And I'm told that they have passed 5% as the interest rate. So if we were going to collect from you landowners, you would know that you'd be paying 5% on outstanding drainage assessments, or you pay up front and don't pay any interest. So the currency that drainage districts use is warrants. We don't use bonds, and we don't use, what's the other one, John? The name escapes me. Etler loves to say it and I hate it.
Yeah, certificates.
Improvement certificates, yeah. So warrants, we're just printing money when we do warrants. A provider submits a claim, the trustees approve it. I'll submit a bill, they approve it. They give it to the auditor prepares a warrant, sends it to me. But he stamps that warrant and says, we don't have any money to pay you, so you can't cash it in yet. We'll let you know when you can. And they get their assessment in and their levy made, and then they can pay off the warrants. Is Pot County buying my warrants for other projects?
I don't think we are.
You just send me a stamped warrant, I think.
Mhm.
I vary from every county. And then I have people in Pocahontas that want to buy my warrants. Because the warrant earns 5%, which is better than 0.5% on a CD for an investor. It is secure. If you landowners don't pay your assessment, your land can be sold at tax sale. And it's federally exempt. So it's taxed just like a municipal bond. And Pot County could buy my warrants if they wanted to, because Pot County is a separate legal entity from Van Linn or Pigeon Creek or Rand Peterson or whoever. So I sell all my warrants from Pocahontas County to Pocahontas County. I never see the warrant. My dad loved warrants. I told you he did this for a long time. He had a cardboard box or a sack where he'd get warrants where he'd work around the state. And boy, when the auditor would call him and say, you can cash your warrant, he was just giddy. You know, I'm buying lunch, I got a warrant coming in. And so he'd get all excited. So I started doing this, and I had 2 kids in college, a mortgage, a couple of car payments, and some credit cards, and I needed money. I needed cash. So I've always just cashed my warrants right away the best way I could. So I'll end with this. When I started practicing law in 1976, my dad says, Jim, you're a lawyer, you can give legal advice, but you cannot give any financial advice. If you're gonna get involved in this drainage, you don't tell landowners any financial advice. So I said, okay, Dad. He says, if you give them financial advice, if it's good, you won't get credit. If it's bad, you'll get cursed for 3 or 4 generations. He said, oh, by the way you spent money in college, you have no business the rest of your life ever giving anybody any financial advice. So I can't tell you what to do on this project, but it should make financial sense if the state and or FEMA is gonna pay for everything. It's a great opportunity to get this fixed. And I think that hole's been in the levee for about, if not from '08, at least 11, so you're going on 10 years.
Jim, briefly, I would say the FEMA funds are very uncertain right now. We're working as hard as we can on it, but they're uncertain.
All that stuff's up in the air. So I'm not going anywhere. I'll turn it over to the engineers. Ask them questions. Once the engineer's done with his report, I will read and we will review all of the objections. That make sense?
Do the trustees need to open a public hearing?
They did.
They did, okay.
Yeah.
I'll just, no,
We just started.
but not very formal.
All right. I didn't know how far.
Law just says we're starting.
All right.
Okay,
Okay.
that's good enough for me.
All right.
Good
All right.
question though.
We
Yeah.
need a motion, Jim.
Motion to open? No. Chair just opens it and away we go. Same thing to adjourn. The chair adjourns, you don't need a motion to adjourn. I'm not here to teach you Robert's Rules of Procedure, but I do have the book in my briefcase in case we get hung up.
It's good. I was gonna make John adjourn.
Well, I get challenged once in a while, so I like to have the books with me. Anyhow, John Rosengren.
Are there any other questions before I start for Jim? Otherwise, if something pops up, speak up. Same for me. I'm John Rosengren. I'm going to step into the middle so that people on the screen can see me if needed. I'll try to make sure I turn around and show you guys as well. I'm John Rosengren with Bolton & Mink, engineer for the project. We have filed our report, and I believe everybody in the room here has gotten a copy. I'm going to try to go through this, hit the main points, go over what the project is, and try to address any questions or comments that come up. Just a brief background on the district as we start. Established in 1943, following one of the largest floods up to that point. I believe it was 10 feet below the 1952 flood elevation. The reason that's important is, we will get into that in a little bit, that 1943 flood was what led to the elevation that the Vanman established later that year. We'll go through that here in a little bit, but the flood occurred in April. The district had their hearings. We're in the process of building by September, so it was a high priority for them in 43. We include in here a history, the research that we've done here in the county. There are some gaps in that history, I know, but this is the best we've been able to locate to this time. Goes through some of the different things that have occurred. Some of the highlights are the district as established connects to what is the Allen Creek on the east end in the H&P Drainage District. It extends north into what is now DeSoto Bend and connects to a levee inside of DeSoto Bend called Colford, which was established in 1928. There is a mapping report that shows roughly 7,500 acres that are benefited by the drainage or by the levee district itself. Roughly 1,500 north in Harrison County, the remaining 6,000 in Pottawatomie County. Our report today is focusing just on the reach inside of DeSoto Bend, north of DeSoto Avenue. Running north here. This is a map that is also included in your report here. Vanman was established with a 200-foot right-of-way that ran through the whole district, including through the portion that is now inside of DeSoto Bend, 30 feet on the land side or the dry side of the levee, 170 feet on the river side, with the engineer's report stating that the borrow was to come from the river side of that easement. Borrow was taken from the easement to construct the levee. I bring that up because that will be a discussion topic as we move forward with our hearing here today and into the future. When it was built, Vanman connected to the Coulthard levee up here in the north part of Section 2, just south of the county line. Coulthard levee had been moved multiple times up to that point. In 1952, a large portion of that area was obliterated by the flood, and Coulthard has since been realigned, so the actual end of Vanman levee has been pulled back about 400 feet by that work. That work was completed by the Army Corps of Engineers in conjunction with the Coulthard levee. So the Vanman levee district has been shortened roughly 400 feet from the original established point. As part of this project, we did a survey of the existing levee to determine elevations as they exist today. We're able to compare that with LiDAR flown by the Iowa DNR in 2007 to 2010 as kind of a baseline it'd be pre-2008, pre-2011, so it was before any serious damage occurred. The LiDAR is approximate, it's not perfect, but at least gives us a sense of what it looked like before these events occurred. And then we add to that the survey that we did, both of the existing levee that still remains and the three damage sites which have led to this report here, highlighted in orange, purple, and yellow on this map. What we found was the bulk of this area in blue, roughly everything from this yellow patch south, is about a foot lower than originally designed. We'll go into that here in just a second. The remaining section of this is a fair bit lower, I believe because of the underlying soils weakening. But the starting point of this was these actual highlighted portions, the orange, blue, and yellow. These south two are very large, very deep scour holes that formed in 2011. There's a lot of history to that, and I don't know if we need to get into that detail today. But suffice it to say, the river flooding filled up the lake. The water couldn't get an outlet back to the river sufficient for the flow coming in. The weakest points it found were these three locations. Dug very deep holes here, 30 to 35 feet below the ground surface, plus the levee itself that was removed. This yellow section up here to the north was a breach, is a breach, not to the same extent. It's roughly just the levee itself cut to ground level, so it's not as severe of a damaged location. So following that investigation, we've come up with a plan to restore it back to the original cross sections, which is one of the criteria for FEMA. They're paying to get this back to original design grade, pre-disaster elevations, not the repair to bring it back up to full elevations. They are paying for fix the damage that occurred, get it back to what it was before that damage happened. Lyle mentioned that is somewhat in question. Again, long history on that. Has to do with easement questions and ownership issues in 2011. Again, that is kind of a third rail that maintenance requirements. There's several pieces that came in to that decision in 2011. FEMA, after looking at it again following 2019, believes that there is a case to be made for them funding these repairs. And so we are pursuing that, attempting to get money to cover those costs. But in addition to that, should that not come through, there's also been funding sought from the State Flood Mitigation Board. Is that how you say it? And they have offered monies to cover the full cost of the project should the FEMA money not come through. So,
and the FEMA representative tells me, John, that basically he says he's doing everything he can, our field man for us. But he says, I gotta be honest, just figure 50-50 whether FEMA comes through or not.
yeah.
In the later stages of the process, there's always somebody with a red ink pen that gets really carried away. So,
Yes.
well, we'll see.
Yes. So, so that is yet to be seen. We will continue dealing with that as that arises. As I said, the repairs that FEMA would pay for are to restore that pre-2011. We've also found the levee itself to be below the original design grade. As Jim said, that should be returned. Part of that discussion, or part of the history of this district, is there is no profile that we've been able to find to this date, a map showing these are the elevations of the levee. So to get back to original design, to figure out what FEMA would be obligated for and what the district would be obligated for, we had to put some effort into determining what was that original grade. In April of this year, we filed a report with the auditor's office and with the trustees. Does everybody have this report dated April 8th, the datum equation report? Oh, and I think there's a stack there behind you. We do have maps that go with this. If you want to see them, we can get those after the hearing here. But this district and then the Coulthard, which ties to it, are kind of a confusing mess because of the lack of plans. So this was our attempt to get back to the best evidence-based datum we could put together. So I'd like to go through this because this is kind of the crux of some of the discussion we're going to have with these objections coming up later. So we started with the 1946 as-built plans. The Vanman Levee District covers roughly 6,000 acres. They had elevations spread across farmland and roadways throughout the district. Using that, comparing it with the LiDAR elevations that exist today, we were able to come up with a fairly tight datum equation. You take the original plan elevations, add 1.5 feet to it, and you match up with what we currently use, the NAVD 88 datum. That was a starting point. And on that same plan sheet, it had noted two locations. It had a southern location near the Allen Creek, and it had a location up in DeSoto Bend, both marked as high water level, dated April 12th, 1943. That was the peak flood of 1943. The next piece that we looked at, the 1943 engineer's report that goes with that plan set. The engineer specifically stated, we are going 3 feet above those marked high water mark elevations from the plan. With that, we now have a grade, 0.0155 feet per 100 feet. Just a little bit less than the foot per mile, John, that you referred to. We were able to put marked locations on there. So that was our starting point. That was our baseline. This is what we believe it to be. Now we try to find evidence to either prove or disprove that. We started with a couple different reports that we had, again, from the neighboring Coulthard district. These two are very much interrelated and refer to each other and trying to tie those together. 1924 Coulthard plans, we attempted to do the same datum comparison that we did with the Vanman. It didn't work out. The elevations were still more than 100 feet off, so I'm not exactly sure what is going on that plan sheet. That's something that we are looking into a little bit further on working in the Coulthard now, but I don't have a good answer for that 1924 plan set. The 1945 engineer's report is one of interest. In 1945, they specifically referenced the newly built Vanman at the junction point is 2 feet higher than the Coulthard levee at that location. We were able to, it provides more information for the Coulthard, but knowing that those two were in that ballpark, we can now compare grades continuing up Coulthard. We can compare with the Vanman to the south. It doesn't give us a lot of information, but it is another tie that gets the two on the same datum. The big pieces that were very instrumental in confirming this datum equation was the actual plans for, it doesn't show up on that map, for the, I don't have anything that really shows it. Inside of DeSoto National Wildlife Refuge, there are two cutoff levees. The old river channel has been cut off by dikes built by the Army Corps in 1956. That was when they dug the new channel, rerouted the river away from this portion of the Vanman, and essentially created the lake that sits there today. That plan set specifically says says connect to the Vanman levee on the south end. It does not specifically say match crowns, but engineering judgment would say if you're gonna connect into something, you're gonna match that elevation. You're not gonna build 2 feet higher, you're not gonna build 2 feet lower. If you've got a protective levee structure, you're gonna tie into it at the elevation that it exists at that time. At 1956, that levee was 13 years old. There may have been some settlement, but not enough to drastically change that levee elevation that they wouldn't have essentially been matching up to the grade of the Vanman as it was designed. So the big problem with that is the elevation shown on that 1956 plan is 103.5, and at that location, our datum equation said 1004.5. So we were a foot higher initially, just looking at the elevations that they had listed on their plan. Okay, something's not jiving, maybe we're a foot high. So the next thing we had to look into was benchmarks. That plan set had no benchmarks of any kind on it, had no way to tie elevations to anything. It was just this line is at 103.5. Is that the same elevation we're using today? Is that something made up? We don't know. After quite a bit of digging, we were able to come up with a benchmark sheet from Harrison County. The county engineer's office had a sheet that came from this core survey. The elevations on it matched up with the 1956 plans, and we were able to compare benchmarks recorded on this sheet to those same benchmarks today. Those benchmark elevations are tracked by the National Geodetic Service. They keep track of those elevations, make sure that everything has a hard elevation, essentially so we can continue to tie stuff together throughout that area. The DNR had done quite a bit of work. They gave me some of their information for that same purpose. Reviewing the elevations that the Army Corps had on their sheets from 1956 and before, and the NGS elevations for those same points today gave a difference of 0.73 to 0.76 feet. Essentially, what the Corps was using was 3/4 of a foot lower than what it would be today if they were to build to the exact same elevation. So if we adjust their plans for that datum error, not datum error, they were using a different datum, that difference in datums, we adjust those together. At the road on DeSoto Avenue, we're less than 2/10 different than the Army Corps. So we're talking 2/10 of a foot difference. So we're talking
3 inches.
3 inches
Yeah,
different.
a little less.
With our grade that was created totally independently, checked against this, we come up with a difference of 3 inches from what was originally built. That's in my mind, about as strong of a tie as you're gonna get, barring having something that we don't know about. Somebody has a shot from 1943 that says the levee at this point was exactly this. You're not gonna find much more than this. If there's more out there, I'd like to know about it. We've been pretty much coming up empty everywhere else we've turned, so.
There was one benchmark that was, wasn't, this is TBM, not tied to GPS, but it was a nail in a tree that's been growing for 60 years, probably gone, and an old bridge on the Chicago Northwestern Railway, the abutment of the bridge up there. Well, the bridge isn't there anymore either, so those are the only, and it was they used it as a TBM, but just not to meet sea level, MSL, so.
Yeah, and that's.
They're long gone.
That's a common problem. Being as it was the Corps, they actually set points, so it wasn't what I'm used to seeing, which is large red rock by the fence post. So we actually had something we could go back to and had elevations on. So that was helpful. So using that, we have presented an elevation in the report here. I did inform Lyle yesterday, there is an error in our report. It should be roughly 3/10 higher than what is shown at the north end to match that 0.0155 or 1 foot per mile all the way through that section of the levee. We will correct that when we do the construction plans. In addition to the levee itself, we also looked at the right-of-way in that area. The 30 feet of right-of-way that exists on the land side is enough to essentially, the slope of that levee comes down, that 30 feet is right at the toe. There's no room to do any maintenance for that on easement at the toe of the levee. Normally, that wouldn't be a major issue in a farm field. We would pay damages to the farmer. We'd have a temporary work area if needed. With Fish and the Wildlife and their desire to have that easement locked down, and they've actually commented to us about having surveyed marker boundaries on that easement at the end of the day. I think it'd be prudent to shift that easement over, and Jim will we'll let you talk about that here in a little bit, but what we're recommending is acquiring 30 feet on that land side and abandoning the same on the opposite side to essentially move that easement over to give us more access for maintenance, for tree clearing, things of that nature going forward on that levee to make sure we keep the trees out of it. I know the comment had come up about trees growing in the levee lead to, I think you brought that up, Jim. Trees growing in the levee create a capillary route. So we want to make sure that we have a clear zone around that levee that we don't get those trees encroaching again in the future. The right-of-way restoring to original. On restoring to the original, because of the depth of those holes, as I said, 30 to 35 feet on these two southern holes, we are actually recommending not putting that levee back to where it was. We're recommending to shift out to the east to go around that. We'll fill the smaller portion of that hole, leave the rest there. My understanding is there's pretty good fishing if any of you are fishermen in those holes. It saves the district a very significant amount of money to not put it back where it was. A fairly minor shift to the east cuts that down, I believe, by about 50%. Corey, is that what you recall?
I think so, yeah.
So, in my opinion, there's better uses for that money than to put it back exactly where it was on the Fish and Wildlife property. That said, we're also recommending that the easement be shifted out around that ring levee also, and that is included in our report as a recommended additional acquisition of easement for the same reason, to allow maintenance, allow construction, allow future tree prevention through that corridor. Page 3 of the report, we talked somewhat about the plan for the actual repairs. Some of the things we need to address are regulatory requirements. U.S. Army Corps Section 404, that is wetland impacts. We've already gotten a letter back from the Corps that there are no requirements for them for wetland or environmental impacts from this project. Section 408, another Army Corps program. These are not Corps-built levees. The Corps may or may not have, the records are unclear, done work to make repairs in the past, but they are not certified by the Corps. They are not Corps levees. They do not fall under the 408 program. Fish and Wildlife. This is one of those issues that will come up, an environmental assessment of the work area. Been brought up several times. Indiana bat impacts, northern long-eared bat impacts. From the research I've done on this project and other projects, the bat issue, if you want to call it that, is really only an issue during their mating season, which is, I believe it's like Colin, you remember June 15th or June 30th to the end of July?
Yeah, it's a couple months.
It's 2 months in the middle of the summer. If there's a roost tree or a maternity tree located in the area, we can't do work within, I believe it's, I'm gonna get this wrong, 250 feet. I believe it's in that ballpark. Once you're outside of that, we can do that work. So, at worst, we maybe shut out a tree clearing for a short time, and that'll depend on whether or not roost trees are found in that easement area. But again, outside of that period, Fish and Wildlife does not have any regulations. They confirm that that is the only requirement that they are aware of at this point, so. State regulations, Iowa DNR Section 401 permit. When we got the letter back from the Corps on Section 404, that comes with the applicable 401, so we're already getting through our state permits. IDNR floodplain permit, and this will be a topic when we get to our objections later. Has to do with compliance with the FEMA flood insurance program requirements and a no rise along the Missouri River within the floodway. So I'm going to mention the county floodplain, and we're going to talk about both of these at the same time here. So county floodplain permit goes along with that state floodplain permit. Again, we have to be able to certify to the National Flood Insurance Program that there is no rise in what they call the floodway. I've got that drawn up. So in the plan set, there's this map that shows the full district. Down here at the bottom is a red boundary called the floodway. We labeled it. Number 10, floodway boundary. So the floodway is a corridor along the Missouri River or other creeks. We're talking about Missouri, so it's a corridor within which whatever work we do, be it repair our levee, build a new levee, whatever that is, we cannot raise the 100-year flood elevation within that floodway boundary. So for this project, we are about half a mile north of that. So we are not directly impacted by that. The next issue is the 100-year flood elevation. The Vanman levee in DeSoto Bend fully sits above the regulated flood elevation from the FEMA flood insurance program. They've run hydraulics on this levee. Back in the 70s, they went through and surveyed all these levees and put it all into a model. The Vanman levee, as it existed pre-2011, as it exists today, except for those 3 breach locations, the top of that levee is fully above the 100-year flood elevation. So we can put whatever fill we want on top of that. We do not change what that water does in the 100-year elevation because the water's coming in from other directions. It has other ways into this region. Essentially, the levee today sits as an island sticking out of that flood elevation. And the reason I keep talking about this is that flood insurance program has the requirements of not raising the 100-year floodway elevation. The county, zoning and planning and zoning here in Pot County has the responsibility to make sure everybody is in compliance with those flood insurance program requirements. If anybody is allowed to do work which raises that floodway elevation above a 0.0 foot raise, 0.00 foot raise, nobody in the county can get flood insurance. So it's important that we comply with that because there are a lot of people who cannot get flood insurance if we mess with that. Being we're outside of that floodway, being all the work that we are proposing is above the 100-year flood elevation already. It sits on an island, so it makes no difference because the water's, again, finding another route around it. We are not impacting either of those. However, we do still have to get the permits to state, or that agree or concur that we are not affecting that floodway elevation. So there is a little bit of a process there that we need to go through. state floodplain section is currently reviewing these permits. We'll have to wait and see what their final judgment is on those pieces before we have a certain elevation we can go back to, but that is currently in process. As it stands today, as I already said, the levee is above the 100-year, so we are already getting 100-year protection. This is just another roughly foot to, I think the highest fill is 3.5 feet in one spot, towards the north end. So,
What would the average be, John, if you took an
average,
average?
I actually calculated it last night, is 1.2 feet of fill across the length of the entire levee inside of DeSoto. So from DeSoto Avenue to the tie-in with Coulthard, it's an average of just over 1 foot of additional fill material.
Why would you need, that extra foot on there? What good does it do?
Well, first off,
Insurance?
what's that?
Insurance?
That's a little bit more insurance for the lanes in the district. They've already paid to build it to that level. You could consider not putting that back. That would be a decision by the trustees. But if you already built it here, we already have an established grade at this point. I don't see a reason to not take the extra protection if you can get it. Again, that's a call by the trustees, what the value of that additional foot of protection is. Strictly from an engineering standpoint, and looking at the drainage code, if we can get that foot, why would we not take it? Because we know that big floods are still coming.
Okay.
Let me go through the rest of the report. I'll try to go through the annexation reclass quickly, and then we can come back and just open it up to general questions. I've shown you these maps here a couple times. As I said, 7,500 acres lie within the protective area of the Vanman levee. The green area here in Harrison County has never been assessed, and they do benefit by protection from that levee. We have recommended that the board at least consider annexing those lands and classifying them into the assessment schedule, which then brings us to the other map that I've already shown, that color shaded map. The color shading on here generally represents the assessments per acre, just to give a comparison for everybody in the district. Looking at that schedule, it's actually fairly equitable, considering that it was done in 1943 and they didn't have a lot of tools to look at the district as a whole. They had to just go out and view the land. Looking at it, I don't think that a total reclassification would drastically change that schedule, so we're recommending if lands are brought in, that they be classified into this schedule to match what the other lands have already been assessed. So then, finally, the nuts and bolts of what everybody is actually here to talk about. The actual estimate is included just before the plans at the back of the report in front of you. We've broken it into 5 separate sections just to try to explain where all the different pieces of funding come from. Section 1, that's what we talked about, the raising of the levee. Yeah, one more page there, Melvin. Section 1 is taking that levee from the 2011 grade up to the original design grade from 1943. And that work on its own comes out to about, coming around to 350, about $400,000 of the total project. Sections 2, 3, and 4 are what we've already talked about, is the breaches in the levee, the breach and or scour hole that exists there. The section 2 and 3 are both reconstructing the levee and filling the low ground back to natural ground elevations on the land side. That's to prevent water flowing through the structure and then being able to boil up in that pool that's left on the east side of the levee. So we put dirt back in there to just slow that water down and try to keep it from forming a flow path under that levee as best we can. Number 4, again, is the shallow breach towards the north end. That was that yellow highlighted area here on this map. Again, that one's a fairly shallow one. We don't need to do a ring levee. The fill material to put that back is relatively minor. Put that back to grade and patch that up. And then finally, erosion control, management, environmental aspects of the project to make sure that we leave the work area and the levee in good condition. We don't create a lot of stormwater pollution, things of that nature with this work. Total construction cost, we were estimating $1.92 million, shown there at the bottom. And then total project is on the next page. One of the things we haven't discussed in depth, but right there at the top, is purchase of imported material. This has kind of been an ongoing situation for 3 months now, Corey, trying to locate, or Lyle, is about 3 months, locate adequate fill material. We do know we have a site in Pot County, a willing landowner, and that's the number that we put here in the report. He's willing to sell the necessary dirt for 70 cents a yard. The problem is the cost of trucking from his site to DeSoto Avenue. I'm estimating it's gonna be about $18 just for $18 per yard to get it from his site to the work site. And that's still, we gotta put it in the ground. We still gotta buy the dirt on top of that. It is a fallback, and it's what I've used in here to kind of set a baseline for the project. We have done several test pits and soil borings inside of the district to try to locate a more local site for dirt, which could meet the needs of the district and save us a fair amount of money. And that we'll come back to in just a second.
John, we might mention that one of the problems with bringing in outside dirt, which it's still much in play, but an issue of trying to get the right to use certain roads.
Yes. Yeah, especially DeSoto Avenue, with the amount of dirt we'd be bringing in, I would be surprised if it didn't essentially turn it to gravel, which is, I know, an issue for John Rasmussen. He's concerned about that. So that's been one of the things we've been trying to find an alternate route that doesn't result in destroying that road as we're doing the work. So,
I hated to have you say that in front of our supervisors, but just kidding.
yeah, no, and that is, I mean, we've come back to that several times. That is, if there were no other issues, we know we've got the money to get it from Frank's, absolutely, let's go do it. But the side issues of how far we've got to get it, getting it on DeSoto Avenue, and then we got to pay damages to do that, or we haul it around on the gravel road, we create dust problems, or we have to treat the road. You know, there's just a lot of things to consider when we're hauling it from such a long distance. It doesn't mean it's not on the table. We're just trying to find a better option at this point. So we've done several test pits locally. We'll see what the geotech company comes back with here. I believe the end of next week is what she was anticipating getting us the data. And then I did meet with Jeff Allen from Midwest Mechanical this morning. He does have 2 sites north and east of Missouri Valley that look pretty promising, and they're around half the distance as what it would be to come from Crescent with the dirt. So they are closer. That one has its own issues, Highway 30, having to get through Missouri Valley, through town, some things like that. So we still have options, but that's the one thing we're waiting on to be able to do bids, is deciding on what we're gonna do for dirt.
We're trying to have multiple choices and narrow it down to the most attractive choice.
That's right. That's right. So, trying to think what. Oh, let's finish this up and we can just kind of open it up at that point. So we've talked about those different expenses, the dirt, getting it to the site, the actual work to build the levees. We've got in here also some of our, well, to the best of our ability, an estimate on our engineering fees to do the work. And then we get down here to the bottom. Total estimated project today, and I believe this is high because I think we're gonna be able to get dirt for less than what we've got in here, but currently is at $2.3 million. Should FEMA come through and provide their 75% cost share, and with that comes state homeland security funds of 10% of the project, so 85% of the cost of the project would be paid through FEMA and Iowa Homeland Security, or $1.7 million. That leaves the assessable portion at $880,000 for the landowners. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Vanman Levy District and several other levy districts in the area applied for additional state assistance from the Flood Recovery Fund through the Iowa Flood Mitigation Board. Those funds are intended to be able to pay the full cost of this project. If FEMA comes through, those funds would only pay for the remaining 15%. If FEMA does not come through, those funds are adequate to pay the full cost of the project that's proposed. As best we can tell, the best information we've gotten from FRF, if we do not spend all of the FRF funds on this portion of the project, we can transfer those to the remaining portion of the Vanman to make repairs there if needed. If we're short on funds there, we can transfer it down and make additional repairs there. So we're trying to find cheaper alternatives for dirt, because that saves us more money that we can be used to make necessary repairs farther south. If there weren't any other repairs to make, we probably have just pulled the trigger already on Frank's and just gone for it. So those are some of the issues that need to be sorted out at this time, but I believe that dirt question is really the only thing holding up letting of bids at this point to proceed toward construction. So are there any other questions about the proposed work or how we came to the elevations we've got, or any other questions or hurdles that you see arising as part of this project?
Lyle, I have a few if he's got a minute.
Sure.
John Kalachi speaking
Sure.
here.
Yeah.
With regard to moving the easements, those locations are all on the refuge?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so this is all gonna be up to Fish and Wildlife and the refuge as to whether or not they'll allow the change in the easement plats, correct?
No, it's not all up to Fish and Wildlife. This is Jim Hudson. It is also up to the Iowa Drainage Code, which provides a method to do that. We have a good working relationship with Fish and Wildlife, and the trustees prefer to negotiate with them. But there are alternatives in the Drainage Code which allow us to condemn additional easement. We prefer not to do it that way. So I'm not being harsh with you, but I know what's being circulated in the, in the taverns and the co-op offices and I guess you haven't been to ball games, so you aren't sitting in the stands talking about it, but I know what's going around. And I've been asked about that, so.
With all due respect, Mr. Hudson, I have not been in a tavern in Harrison. I have been in them previously and with a couple people in the room. So that's not where I heard that. I just happen to know that you know, it's one thing to say you're gonna beat the federal government, it's another thing to do it. You would agree with that?
No, not entirely. I expect the federal government to respect and recognize Iowa law if they're going to do things in the state. Just like the federal government wants Iowa to respect federal law. I'm not being,
As do I, we're in agreement. We're in agreement. Okay, next point on the design, and specifically the removals. I'm on the eastern side of the state, the People's Republic of Johnson County to be specific.
oh my,
But
oh my God.
over here, we can't do any type of serious clearing and grubbing, tree removal, et cetera, where the Indiana bat is present, except between the months, or during the months of November through March, November 1st through March 15th or 20th specifically. So just a heads up that may be a roadblock over there. Then I guess my next question is, what's and this is for the engineer, the elevation or the levee elevation with respect to the center line of DeSoto Avenue?
Yes. Was there a question there, or just my comments on it?
What is it? Is it 3 feet higher, 2 feet higher, 4 feet lower? What's the?
At DeSoto Avenue, on the center of DeSoto Avenue, we are either spot on or just not even half a foot at the most extreme there off. Corey did send me a text last night asking about from our plans here, it shows about 1.1 feet at be the east end on DeSoto Avenue. That 1.1 feet is actually because of the way that our alignment doesn't exactly follow the center line there, so it's not actually 1.1 feet at that point. We're talking inches, not feet of difference there.
Okay. So you don't consider that a potential breach point if the levee on both sides of the DeSoto Avenue right of way are repaired and it isn't raised?
It always has that potential. I guess one of my thought processes, and I hadn't actually said this out loud to myself even until I saw Corey's text last night. We have really not messed with DeSoto Avenue at this point because we've been trying to hurry this portion of the project through because it's the only breaches in the levee. And that was just one more piece to slow down the project. We will be still looking at the remaining 6 miles, and we have not as much of an emergency time crunch to get holes filled to avoid our flood issue that we talked about. Essentially, FRF, it'd be a, I don't know how I want to say that. The FRF gives us this money, and we turn around next year, we haven't got anything done with these breaches, and we get flooded again, I think would be the worst case scenario for the district. So trying to expedite this portion in DeSoto and get these breaches filled, the DeSoto Avenue issue has been put on a back burner, and whether that's rolled into the 6 mile portion later this year or is addressed separately in the future, it is still a risk, but it's not an immediate pending risk, I guess is how I would say that. It's something that should be addressed, but we have time to fix that piece.
The only reason I bring it up.
You cut out?
The only reason I bring it up is it would be an opportunity to repair the damage that's going to happen to that roadway when we haul fill in through that opening. That's all.
That's very true. That's very true. And that may be something we can address as a damage. We would be damaging that road. We would need to help reconstruct that as part of that reconstruction. Maybe we can make that adjustment then. That's a good thought.
Okay, two more questions. Is the 6 mile reach below design elevation as well, or below what you thought was the as-built elevation?
It is below the as-built elevation. Some portions more than others. The vast majority of it, probably 70% of it is still above the 100-year flood elevation. There's one section, from the data we have so far, we don't have all of our survey data back yet. There's one section, in section 13, they say it's a little bit beyond that on each side, but section 13, it's a little bit lower than the 100-year elevation. All of it is to some degree below the original design. That section 13 is quite a bit farther below the original design. I believe that's where we're gonna have more of our issues with permitting, trying to get that back to original repair grades.
DNR,
The DNR is gonna be that section there because we were so close to the floodway. As I said, portions of it are below the 100-year flood elevation. We're gonna have to look at that piece a little bit more thoroughly as we proceed with that repair.
Okay. And then, I guess the last question I have for the engineer was, when that levee was originally constructed, they didn't truck clay out of the Loess Hills to build that, did they? They just scraped it right off the bottom and built the levee. Is that a reasonable assumption?
That's right. From everything we can see, they took it right out of the easement on the river side of the levee. As I stated, the 43 engineers report describes a right-of-way of 170 feet on the riverside, and they state that the borrow shall come from the riverside. They don't say that it shall come from the inside of the easement, but if you go out there today, there are very clearly borrow pits at the toe of those levees. So they weren't taking it from somewhere out in the field, they were taking it from that easement on the riverside. So had they put that exact word within the easement, that would solve some of our discussion with the Fish and Wildlife Service. But out on the ground, it is very clear that those borrow pits are inside of the easement on the riverside.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, that being the case, would one consider fly ash stabilization, lime stabilization, cement stabilization of nearby soils just to make them work and beat that $18 a yard trucking charge, which, by the way, I agree, that's what you're gonna pay.
Yeah. I hadn't really considered that until Lyle and Corey had mentioned you'd thrown that idea out the other day. I don't have much experience with doing that work, and so I couldn't put an accurate number on it. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I would have to see how the numbers would work out. I'd have to do a little bit of digging at what that option would look like. I'm not opposed to doing that.
I think you'll see DOT bid tabs ranging anywhere from, $3 or $4 per yard up to 7 or 8. I mean, but I think it's going to be half or less than the trucking cost.
Mm-hmm.
And it would not completely, but drastically reduce the damage to DeSoto Avenue if it was an alternative that you chose to propose.
Sure. No, that's something. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, you'd be running, pig loads of ash or cement or lime down that roadway rather than, side dumps or tandems and pups.
Yeah, it'd be a lot fewer loads, which is,
Yes.
It's the number of loads that's doing the damage, not necessarily the weight of the loads. The weight does have a factor on it, but the number and the weight combined is what does that damage. So no, that's certainly something we can look into as we're going to bids, and if we can get those numbers together and it's cheaper, that'd be something we can consider.
Sure. Thanks. Well done, by the way.
I got a question.
Hold on, we got a couple questions for the attorney too.
No, not for the attorney.
What do you got for the engineer?
So I want to forget the engineer report on an annexation.
Yeah.
Well, that's for the attorney. So the annexation, the land in Harrison County that you're talking about? Mr. Hudson, is that currently in a drainage district or levy district?
I think so.
Which
I'm-
one?
I don't know.
Some of it's in Coulter.
I was just saying, there's portions in Colthard, I guess if you want all of them, there's some in Nobles Lake, some in, there's Fensler District, there's some for Allen Creek, which H&P. And there's a handful of districts that do serve different purposes in that area.
But Nobles Lake would be
The primary.
there, yeah.
Okay.
I'm the primary.
That's not a concern, by the way.
It is to me. It cost me lunch. I bet Uncle Frank.
You better get out of the tavern.
I'm not in the tavern. I'm sitting in my office. I keep going.
No, and my non-smart aleck answer is, land can be in way more than one drainage or levy district at the same time. We have instances where I'm from, Pocahontas County has in excess of 250 drainage districts. I mean, the entire county is in a drainage district of one ilk or another. A lot of times on the edges of those drainage districts, there's tremendous overlap. We have 40-acre parcels that exist in 4 or 5 drainage districts at the same time. And typically, we fix that by in the classification. If there's land up in Harrison County that's already in a district, when we annex it, we would make adjustments to the classification. If they get flood protection one way, and we give them flood protection this way and annex them, there's an adjustment, a proper adjustment in the assessment schedules.
Okay, so but that annexation wouldn't require consent of those folks within that area now?
No, and to the contrary, if they all object, they can't resist it.
Really?
Yep,
Okay.
that's what the law
I thought
says.
I thought you said earlier that if 75% of the landowners within a drainage district objected to something, it couldn't happen. Maybe I misheard
No,
or
what I said was, I was talking about what's called a remonstrance, John. What that is if more than 50% by population, who also own more than 70% of the land area, object to an improvement or forming a new district, that can't move forward. But remonstrance does not apply to repairs, right-of-way, annexation, reclassification, completion,
Okay.
common outlet, a number of other things that we do with district hearings and projects.
Oh, okay.
That's
Now
a good question, because it comes up all the time, because if a landowner thinks he's gonna be in more than one district, he thinks he's gonna be double assessed. That's not how it happens.
It does not, okay.
We adjust the assessment so it's equitable for the landowner.
Okay, so,
My last question is the DeSoto,
one more here, hold on.
the DeSoto Drainage District, is that included in that annexation?
I guess, so the question is you mean the Banman district?
No, DeSoto.
Is there a DeSoto drainage district or a piece of that district that would be included in that annexation?
I don't know if a DeSoto, is there, you thinking maybe Colthard?
Colthard maybe, yeah.
No, DeSoto.
Now, he's saying DeSoto. I guess let me get a better frame of that question. I'll just email it to you or something.
Okay, yeah, I'm not aware of a DeSoto, so I wonder if you're thinking of a different name.
Yeah, exactly.
They're saying they don't know what they're saying.
Well,
That's what they're saying.
right, and I don't think they're saying that. I think they're saying, what, Frank, I've never heard of a DeSoto drainage district. That's the problem.
You read it.
Thanks.
Paul, do you know up here in Harrison County?
That I know of.
I wonder if he was referring to government-owned ground that is,
I think he was probably talking about Colthard, because he's asking about, I think the question is, are we saying that area that's being annexed is not benefited by any district, or or is not assessed by any district, but it is assessed. It would have Coulthard levy district in there as well, some of that ground. There's Fensler, Nobles, all of those have other districts that provide other benefits. And I think, to clarify one of the things you said, Jim, is that they're being classified for different benefits from the different districts.
And we have a supervisor here from Harrison County, and he says, no, there's no such DeSoto
I've
district.
never heard of it. There's a north and a south Nobles.
Okay.
Now, you have a tremendous amount of overlap of levy districts, drainage district. It's like, the map would just amaze you at how much overlap there is. And that was an early concern in this area when I started doing work. But I think you've let each of those districts function the way they need to, and it's working okay.
Yeah, they're all doing a different job.
We made a mistake. It's the Nobles district we were talking about, not the Soto.
Okay.
So part of that land that is planned to be annexed is in the Nobles district, I think you said, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Anybody else on the phone have questions or comments?
There were a couple letters written, and those need to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
More than acknowledged.
Okay.
I'm gonna read them in their entirety.
Okay.
And what I'm gonna do next, this is Jim Hudson. I have a handful of objections that have been filed with the auditor. And how I typically do this is I'll read each of the objections and then review them. The first one I have is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is from Tom Cox. And Tom, I think you're on the phone, aren't you?
Get bored.
Do we lose Tom? Well, I'm still reading the objection. If he comes on and wants to talk about this further, we can review it with him. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service supports the Vanman Levy District.
No, I'm here. I'm just.
He was on mute.
Okay, that's, yeah. So I'm gonna read your letter, Tom. And then we can talk with you about it if you have any more comments. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service supports the Vanman Levy
There's a
District.
delay between the video and the phone.
Yeah, just give him a second after you talk.
I'm done talking until I start reading. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service supports the Vanman Levy District in their effort to repair damages caused by the 2011 and 2019 floods. The service has been working closely with the district to implement this project. While the service has been willing to investigate possible borrow areas on the refuge, it does not recognize that fill material can be removed from the right-of-way as a right given for the levee. After reviewing the most recent plans, the refuge also opposes the proposed increase in elevation of the levee. It appears that while originally thought to be a minor elevation change, that significant flood impacts would result not only on the refuge, but to public roads and private lands and drainage to the north and west of the Vanman and Coulthard levees, from raising the levee above the pre-existing height. John, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so I know this will come up in at least two more of the letters. I believe it's just two more of the letters. I don't believe that to be correct. The elevations that we're using for the 100-year flood are based on the modeling that is done by FEMA back in the 70s, closer to the time these were built. The levees as they exist are already taken into account. If there's additional flooding upstream, it's because of modifications done by other drainage districts upstream that have modified that 100-year elevation. Those issues should be addressed by those other districts and entities, DOT being one of them that'll pop up here in a minute. As I said before, the entirety of the work on the Vanman is being done on top of an island in an ocean in that flood. whatever we do on top of that island doesn't change the water level of the lands around it. If they're concerned about something higher than the 100-year flood elevation, that's not regulated by FEMA or the Corps. And if it is, I'm not aware of that. And I've asked, that was part of my conversation, Larry Buss is another one that'll come up. I asked Larry that and he said, no, it's not regulated. He acknowledged that. So as I understand it, we're concerned about something above what's regulated. And at that point, if it's not regulated, we're not required to acquiesce to that.
I'm gonna go on, Tom. It also appears that the mainstream Missouri River levee within the refuge could also be compromised by this proposed elevation, adding significant flooding risk to the entire area. The service strongly recommends that the HEC-RAS model be used to evaluate changes to hydrology and subsequent impacts due to this project. Any other comment, John?
Well, we should have read the DOT one first. I believe that's part of our plan after this hearing is to consult with them, make sure that they're on board with the elevations we have. So we will be taking a look at that, Tom, to make sure that we're not changing anything. But just looking at the situation, again, if there's more pressure being put on the mainline levee in DeSoto, it's because the levee upstream has been removed and should be rebuilt.
So could you just, for my simpleness, HEC-RAC model, what that is?
I don't know exactly what it stands for, but it's essentially a water surface profile. So they put all the cross sections for the river so backing up, when they did these FEMA flood insurance maps back in the 70s, they started the program. They went out and they actually took physical cross sections at the river. They take that data and they load it into a program like HEC-RAS is what we call it. And they've changed somewhat since then. More computing power makes them work better. But essentially you look at, I had this cross section of ground through my river valley, and I have this much water coming down. How deep is that water gonna be? So what Tom is asking is that we look at this modification, what does that do to the flow through the whole system coming down? Again, because this is not on the main line, the flow coming down the river should be kept out by DeSoto cutoff levees. And if the Ram Peterson were built at some point in the future, that would also divert that water away. So if more pressure is being put on the mainline levee, as I said, it's because it's coming in where a levee once existed, no longer does. It's putting too much flow in there that the small outlet in the lake can't vacate it quickly enough. And I believe that's what led to the breaches in 2011. And Lyle anecdotally has told me that water wasn't going out that way. It found its low spot in the levees here in 3 places, up in the Colthard in 1, and found that way for the water to get out. So.
It seems to me like it might be more pertinent for the DeSoto Refuge to be looking at an outlet for their lake, because the reason we have the issues we do is because it's a bowl that fills up and there's nowhere for the water to go. It's blocking of a natural oxbow, so their interest ought to be more about getting water out of the lake than worrying about our dikes.
Don, why don't you guys just give your name if you haven't talked before, and Don, you're with the Fensler also, right?
Yeah, I'm a neighbor there, and I've been there my whole life, and it just, everybody seems to just neglect the fact that we got a bowl that fills up, we don't have anywhere to go, and we need an outlet out of the lake, and I mean, the fact that we're gonna flood Highway 30, to me, is ridiculous. Living there as long as I haven't seen the water like it is, just an opinion, but I just don't know why we don't deal with getting some type of an outlet, so we don't have these problems.
Yeah, and I will say on Tom's behalf, I know that they did request that in funding this year. I don't know where that stands currently, Tom, and if you're able to give any update, or if you're willing to or not, that's your call. But I know that it originally had been requested. I don't know the status on that.
This is Tom, and we submit that for funding. That was turned down. The funding was turned down for us for an outlet. But it also is the fact that I think what Don is referring to, we cannot build a structure big enough to handle Missouri River flow to let water back out. You know, that's just, that is not, I don't think, possible from an engineering standpoint. That wouldn't cause subsequent additional flooding problems. So the structure that we have now is adequate to maintain normal flows from all the ditches that do drain into the refuge and the watershed. But when the Missouri River does come out of its banks and we take direct flow from the river, that's a significant amount of flow.
Yeah. And I would agree with that statement that the Missouri River flows, we're not gonna be able to get through any culverts or man-made structures. It needs an actual channel to handle those.
And by the way, Tom has worked real well with us, and we want to continue to work with him well. And I want to mention, Tom, our apologies, because we were going to get back to you a couple of weeks ago on the reply to you, and there's been circumstances that have not been we've not been able to, and that time was coming shortly. It had nothing to do with the hearing time or anything. So we will be talking to you very shortly on that, Tom.
Let me finish.
Yeah, I realize.
Let me finish.
I realize that.
Let me finish Tom's objection. This is Jim Hudson. And Tom, to address the nature of the Vanman Levee right-of-way, it's not a good topic for discussion at this hearing, but it's certainly one I would like to review with you and anybody else with Fish and Wildlife. I am the reason for the delay in response because it took me a while to write an opinion letter, which I've done. And Vanman now has that, and we can review, if you want to, what I believe the right-of-way is. When drainage districts acquire right-of-way, they require a permanent easement for right-of-way. That's the technical name given to it. And it is acquired, this one was acquired under the Drainage Code in 1943. And because of that, because it was acquired through the Drainage Code, it's not the typical easement you might work with or a couple of local lawyers or AG's office or somebody for the federal government drafted and crafted. This is under the Drainage Code, which anticipates and accommodates construction of drainage facilities. So that's the nature of the easement that we have. Your acquisition of land next to that easement had in no way, shape, or form any impact on the easement that Vanman had. That's my short answer, and I don't want to get into that today, and it's not a good forum to do it, but I'm more than happy to go through it with you at any time.
Jim, all I'm going to say is I'm a waterfowl biologist. This is a discussion for the attorneys to have, but our guidance has been that the mineral rights are not given up by that. And
I heard that and I disagree, so we'll have to take it up with counsel for you.
Sure.
And that's fine. That's a good discussion to have. So Tom, does that go through your...
I guess I'd also like to just point out, even beyond that argument, the areas where you would be proposing, because there's another borrow area there that's outside of the right of way, on the plan as I see it, and that is not a right given. That is something where a right of way would have to be given as well.
Yes, that would be a new area of right of way. If we're able to get borrow from that site, it would be by agreement. And we've been telling there have been several landowners that have asked about local borrow. Yes, it would be acquired through some form of right of way, but in any case, it's going to be by agreement. If we're doing it locally or we're taking it from somebody's hill, we're not doing this by condemnation. We're doing that borrow outside of our easements by agreement only. So.
And we want that to be known by our landowners and Fish and Wildlife, we, we want to work with agreement, and that's true.
Yeah, and we talked about looking at some of the other areas. The point I was originally gonna make is just suitability. Those areas that were borrowed once, when that levee was originally constructed, and if you wanna try and go back in there and borrow again, I think your soil's gonna be a heck of a lot different.
And John, I think you've mentioned that. I think we are aware, Tom, if to the degree we can get borrow is uncertain there, and that will be yet to be known, and maybe it would almost amount to nothing. We do realize that, and but we don't feel under Jim's opinion that we should summarily give away the right to it and set a precedent.
The other point I'd like to just bring up, and again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, the discussion about using fly ash, some of those items, there may be, and I don't know this, it's just, I'm trying to think ahead, looking for problems here, or things that are going to stall this. Are there going to be any environmental impacts from that to our watershed, to our waterways, to our direct wetlands that are right there next to this levee?
Yeah, there's that potential, and that's one of those things we'd have to look into if we're going to consider that. Again, I have not used fly ash, so I don't know exactly what that looked like. I'd have to talk to some of our other engineers who have to know what their experience has been on fly ash stabilization. I know that it is used commonly, but I don't know what environmental regulatory hoops they've got to go through to be able to get those approvals. So, no, I agree, Tom. We will look into that as we're addressing that fly ash question. John?
Fly ash is there's all kinds of it down in South Constable that used to sell it off, but they're having problems getting rid of it because of the usage. You still use bentonite, but that's terribly expensive. And I've used both, and bentonite's a lot easier to work with.
Okay.
But yeah, fly ash it's been a problem.
Sure.
Base stabilization is what it's been used for mostly, and then pave over the top of it. But out in the open, I just don't know whether that's going to work or not. Bentonite's all right for it, but I just don't think they're not using it for exposed ground.
Right, they're putting it under something that protects it, keeps it from percolating away.
Hey, Tom, this is Corey. I just wanted to ask, I know that John went over the datum report here with the general audience, but that's something that you've had since early mid-April when it was originally generated. I was just wondering, we haven't talked to you recently, has Fish and Wildlife taken any issue with the elevations as he's discovered and calculated there, or do they have anything to the contrary that should be brought forth publicly?
It hasn't been looked at in depth. I honestly, just getting the plan last night was putting everything together, for myself, to submit up to these guys. I think the big question is going to be, John, and I've always supported you guys to build this thing to the level where it, what is there, or what it was pre-2011. I think the jump is looking a little bigger than what we originally anticipated. I guess my question to you, John, is listening to your justifications. I think you did a hell of a job digging all this out. But all the points that countered your points were found to be in error. But the points that did agree with where you want to get to as 1,005 and raise that levy were the accurate ones. And to me, I think that's going to have to be the proving point.
Sure. So the ones that I threw out were more than 100 feet different. So I just assume that if I can't get it to correspond here, I'm doing something wrong. So I just set that one aside and looked at other data points. That was essentially all the data points I had. I didn't really have any other pieces to look at, so I put everything in there that we looked at and listed the ones that didn't work for us, so, those are all publicly available. We can get you copies as well, so.
Okay.
Tom, any other comments on your objection?
Nope, those are it.
Okay, thank you.
John, you have been good to work with, so appreciate it.
Good, thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Next one, this is in no particular order. This is from the Rand Peterson Levy District Board of Trustees, Harrison County. Larry Buss, I know, is on the line. I hope you still are, Larry.
He's on mute.
Are you on mute, Larry? Fine with me if you want to stay muted. Let me explain something as I address this letter. Number one, I don't believe that Rand Peterson Levy District owns any land in the Vanman Levy District. You don't have any permanent easement for right-of-way or any other kind of ownership in that levy district. Secondly, people here tell me that neither Larry Buss, Dave Hansen, or Britt, I always struggle with your last name. Liljedahl? Liljedahl, you say the J? Oh, must not be same kind of Norwegian as I know. Anyhow, none of you three trustees own any land in Vanman Levy District. In order to have legal standing to file an objection in a district project, those are only available from landowners in the district. Now, this is probably some good information. We're not going to throw it away. I'll give it to the auditor to keep in the records and a copy to the engineer, and you can certainly have a discussion with our engineer. But you don't have standing to do it, just like I don't. I don't own any land in Harrison or Potawatomi County. So that's where that starts from. And I know you've had an ongoing discussion with the elevation. And that's a good discussion to have. We're going to try to do it as best we can. So I'm just going to put your objection aside. The trustees are aware of what it says. The landowners is just, Larry's got some differences with what he thinks the elevation should be. And I think he also has concerns, whether it's in this objection or not, that there needs to be some coordination between Rand Peterson and levees to the south, so you get better protection. That's good. Anyhow, next up is from Frank Wagner. I know was Frank in the room with John?
Yes.
Are you still on, Frank?
Yes.
I'm going to read yours next, Frank.
Okay.
This is to Melvin Hauser, the Pot County Auditor, for Vanman levy repairs. My name's Frank J. Wagner, and you get your address here and your what you own, and you own land in the levy district, don't you, Frank?
Yes.
Okay?
Well, it depends what levy district you're talking about.
Vanman. We're talking about Vanman and Vanman only today.
I own in the Vanman levy district.
Yes. So you have a valid standing to file an objection, which you have done. Here are your concerns. One, right-of-way. You and I talked on the phone at length about right-of-way, and I've talked to the trustees about it, and your concerns are, I believe the temporary right-of-ways might be needed over private land. We do this frequently when we do drainage repairs. Rather than buy additional right-of-way, we just pay a landowner for temporary right-of-way. We have totally opposed to any permanent right-of-way being created. Well, that'll be based upon some engineering recommendations to the trustees. It's also understood that any damage caused by right-of-ways will be repaired to the owner's satisfaction. Both Wagner and Kensinger families are opposed to any right-of-way over the closed county road called Wilson Lane. This is a 2,640-foot long, 66-foot wide improved road that was closed by the county in 2018. Was that abandoned by the county and now you've acquired ownership because the county, as you may or may not understand, Frank, only had a right-of-way through this land. So when they go through the process to abandon their road, it reverts back to the people that own the land. So it's private property now. I also understand that the normal state laws covering right-of-way will be followed. Well, that's correct. I'm advising the trustees to use the drainage code right-of-way. We can use Chapter 6B, which is normally done by other entities, but that's not useful and it's too cumbersome for this situation. We're going to negotiate with Fish and Wildlife and get something figured out. So, right-of-way is not the subject of this hearing. This will be kept in the file, and if we go to right-of-way acquisition, this will be your objection to it. 2, I was informed by one of the trustees for Vanman Levy that the hearing stated for June 24 will only cover the area where the levee runs through federal ground, DeSoto Natural Wildlife Refuge, yes. And where all repairs are to be made. Is that accurate?
Yes, this hearing is just the DeSoto portion. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's already been a hearing on the remaining repairs south of DeSoto Avenue on the 6 mile portion.
So number 2 is correct, Frank. That's what we're doing. And the engineer's report states that the levee district has a 200-foot wide right-of-way on the entire length in the DeSoto NWR area. That is the right-of-way that was acquired by drainage district procedure in 1943 when this levee district was formed and the levee was built. That's 200 feet wide. That's how it exists today. Number 3, the taking, acquisition of private land or the taking of dirt, fill on private land or any other materials is not mentioned in the notice and should not be a topic of the hearing of June 24, 2020. Taking is referred in this, and it comes out of the federal court case of Manneman that says if government is going to take, then the landowners need to be told the consequences of not objecting to and how the taking will occur. And the notice talks about giving tentative approval, and it also gives a warning to the landowners that if you fail to file an objection, things may happen to you, most notably repairs made. We've not reached any hearing whatsoever about right-of-way acquisition. That notice is totally different. So we are mindful of the law regarding government taking and how to proceed in a proper manner under the law to do it. I don't know how clear I can be, Frank.
Yes, it is clear. The only problem is that's not clear. It wasn't mentioned in the notice, though.
Well, there are a lot of things that aren't in the notice. I'm just covering what we're doing today.
Well, I think that's an important thing that should have been in. Not that I'm not going to object to it anymore. It's too late for that. I do have one last question. The question is, I have no idea the land north of the Harrison County line, or the districts in Harrison County. I don't know what the name of that new drainage district is. I'm talking about just drainage now.
Well, Walt, do you know anything about it?
I know of no new drainage district.
The drainage districts up there would be the Nobles
Let's
Lake.
be talking about the Nobles here.
Well, there's
last
a north
decade,
and a
you
south
opened up
Nobles Lake.
Okay, and then
Brown?
he's over to the west, so Fensler would be the only other one, but I don't think
Well,
that's
the
what you're
Nobles
referring to.
was closed for years,
Yeah.
and then after 11, it had to be.
Frank, why do you have concerns about that?
Because when things become confused of what we're talking about, I do know that the Nobles Lake drainage district north of the Harrison County line was ended or done away with, and a new district was formed. And for some reason, the name given to it is the Coulter Levee Drainage District. To me, the Coulter Levee has its own drainage district. I mean, the Coulter Levee is a district. That's why I bring that up. It's confusing. I also know that the Nobles Lake south of the Harrison County line still exists, and it's not controlled by trustees. It's controlled by the Harrison County and the Potawatomi supervisors.
Yeah, I wonder if the Coulthard Plains do show those Nobles Lake ditches up there, but as I understand it, the only thing Coulthard has is the levee.
There used to be a drainage district on Coulthard, but yeah.
Frank, all of the records in either the Harrison County Auditor's Office or the Potawatomi County Auditor's Office will answer all those questions, and the different officials would be happy to talk to you about it. It's really not the subject of today's hearing, Frank.
Well, okay, but we'll just leave it. We'll leave it confused, and I'll talk to Lyle about that. He had a lot to do with it. Okay.
I think you and Lyle are both a little confused. Just my opinion.
I plead guilty.
I'm confused, Frank. This is from Mary Frances Kensinger. I think she was on the phone earlier. Mary Frances, are you still on? Or any representative from Mary Frances? Chief Frank's sister?
No, sister-in-law, my
Sister.
aunt.
Okay, so let me read this and we can discuss it if anybody has any comments. In response to the notice of hearing on proposed repairs on the Vanman Levee repairs, DeSoto, also, I am in support of the Board of Trustees' much-needed repairs to the Vanman Levee to protect our farmland from being further flooded and for other damage as occurred in the 2019 fiasco, and having it completed as soon as possible. Okay? So this is what's called a letter of support, which the notice also invites. Rarely, I go to these all over the state, and I usually get a negative objection, and the silent majority that want the project don't speak up. So I appreciate that. However, what I object to is the boilerplate to comply with law, that if I fail to object, that I lose my right to appeal the final decision of the board's action to the Iowa District Court. I'm required in my notice to tell you that because of the Manneman decision, to let you know the consequence of your failure to object. So I do not anticipate challenging any decisions of the Board of Trustees, as they have my trust in completing the event in a timely manner. Again, I do object to losing my right to appeal if I fail to object to any part of the notice at this time. The reason you lose your right to appeal is under section 468.83 of the Iowa Drainage Code. You have to file a written objection in order to appeal the board's decision to district court. If you don't want to appeal their decision today or any time in the future, you don't need to file an objection. You can still participate. So, and in this particular one, the project's gonna go forward whether you object or not, because it's a repair. So, I guess thanks for your letter. Appreciate the support.
Jim, in defense of my sweet aunt, who never said anything bad about anybody in her whole life, she has 2 brothers, a sister, and a father who were all attorneys. So you can't blame her for acting like she does.
I am the 14th lawyer in a line of attorneys for 4.5 generations. But I dare say the rest of them don't know even remotely as much as I do.
Nor are they here to argue that.
You can't speak from the grave. So you're right, and it's a good letter. We appreciate it. When we get those supporting letters, I always want to thank the landowners for standing up and saying they want it. Now, who's up next? Scott Schramm, Iowa DOT. Is anybody on the line for the DOT?
That's the guy I'm most worried about.
Okay, listen
I
up.
forgot to hit the mute button.
Listen up, Frank. I'll just start at the top. Good afternoon. This is from Scott Schramm, PhD, PE, District Engineer, District 4, Iowa DOT. In response to the proposed repairs by the Vanman Levee District, the Iowa Department of Transportation acknowledges and supports the district's legal obligation to restore protection to the beneficiaries. However, due to impacts to state highways and the absence of sufficient historical evidence, the department cannot support the proposed elevation of 1005.1. Raising the Vanman 1 to 3 feet above the pre-2011 flood levels, 1004.4, will have adverse impacts to US 30 and I-29 during Missouri River flood events. It's estimated that this standalone project would provide a 100-year flood protection at best, benefiting only those within the protection area. Instead, the DOT offers a global solution that would bring 500-year protection to the area to better serve the taxpayers and landowners and be a better use of flood recovery funds. A summary of analysis is attached. The proposal can be summarized as follows. 1, perform spot repairs on the Vanman not to exceed 1004.4. Address that, John, the spot repairs you've outlined, and the total elevation is about a half a foot higher than this.
So essentially what that 1004.4 is the height of the levee today, as it sits out there today, which is roughly what it was in 2011. So they're proposing only repairing those holes back to the pre-2011 elevation, not taking it back to what was originally built, which would be about a foot higher through most of it. 1.25 feet was the average fill.
So you disagree with that?
I disagree with that.
2, reestablish the Rand Peterson levee from US 30 downstream to the DeSoto National Wildlife Refuge levee. This is essentially the temporary levee that was constructed during the 2011 Missouri River flood, which kept US 30 open to traffic. Without this levee in place, US 30 would have been inundated to a depth of up to 2 feet during the 2011 flood event. So we can't control what Rand Peterson does.
Right.
We have dialogue ongoing with Larry Buss and some other trustees, and I think that's a wonderful idea, Scott, but we can't work up and down the corridor of the Missouri River. We can only impact what we're dealing with Vanman.
Yep.
Benefits. Coulthard protection is restored to a 500-year. Vanman protection is restored and reinforced to 500-year, 37,000 additional acres of protected farmland.
Yeah, and this kind of is along the same lines as Tom's comments earlier, that the Rand-Peterson does provide a huge protective area, and it would be beneficial to build it. That's not Vanman's responsibility to build it, but I don't think anybody objects to building it, to my knowledge. I think everybody's in support of it.
We have totally supported the Rand-Peterson. If they can make an extension, we recognize the value in it. We're totally supportive. We've advocated for their help in getting funding. But from our engineers' advice and so forth, at this time, we still see our levy as necessary for the purpose it serves.
Yep. And first off, until the Rand-Peterson is built, this area is exposed. When the Rand-Peterson is built, assuming it is built, that doesn't make the issues of the drainage into the lake go away. We still have water coming into that lake that we need to protect against. And that tube that Tom is talking about probably would be in the ballpark of adequate. I don't know exactly the hydraulics on that offhand. I haven't looked at that. But if we keep the Missouri River out, this whole system works better. This whole system, when it was built, had that levee there, and it all relied on that functioning. So I fully agree the Rand-Peterson should be built, but that's not your decision. That's not your cup of tea to deal with today.
In the entire history of our levees, roughly 70, 75 years, they coexisted with that private levee before in the system. What changed a lot was when in the 58, whatever, when they put the Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife Corps of Engineers put the blocking road in, that changed the dynamics. And that we're all dealing with that now. And we have appreciated Tom's effort to try to get more outlets just because of even getting the drainage out better is an advantage for those folks up north which need that. So we want to work with all the entities the best we can and try to make agreements with all of them. But Jim is repeatedly pointing out to us our sacred duty to do the repairs on our levee.
And they're only 9 years late. No, you landowners are entitled to relief from this levy. You're in this district, and so you're entitled to adequate protection. He carbon copies his letter to David Clayman. I've had to school David Clayman with the DOT of what constitutes adequate drainage. That's what we operate under. He attaches to this a letter to the Flood Recovery Advisory Board and to the Iowa Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Letter of support for Rand-Peterson levy application. Well, we can't be for or against anything Rand-Peterson's doing. And this is a good letter to them to step up your game. And I'm out of objections, but I do want to tell the group too. I first got involved in drainage and levee in southwest Iowa, I believe in January of 2012. It was right after that flooding in 8 and 11. I came down and I had lunch with Larry Buss and Lyle McIntosh. And we went to a big meeting, maybe 60, 70 people at that Wildlife Refuge Center. Tom Cox may have been putting stuff up on the screen and discussing, and everybody was just clamoring all around the room for Senator Grassley to open up his pockets and Senator Harkin to cut a check for $1 million to fix this very hole we're talking about today. And they wanted Latham and King to get busy. And I stood up and told the group, I'd have been a lot louder today than I was back then. Scott, I think you were there too. You're always there when I go to drainage down here, which is good. I'm glad you're interested. And I just said, you gotta get up and down the whole river, go from like Sioux City down to Hamburg and have a big regional system, which you can easily do. And then just manage it in each county or have interim boards or whatever. And so you coordinate all this business. I realize that this levy's maybe secondary to the big Rand Peterson, but you still gotta have it. You guys need this levy here, and you need protection with Fensler. You've gotta have that stuff.
Yeah, so it'll gets out, it ends up over there.
Yeah. But, so everybody needs to coordinate as best they can. But nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, people, it's difficult to get that done, to move forward. Did a bunch of work for Rand Peterson recently, and I talked it up again. They said, we don't want to do that now. And Lyle's kind of the same way. There's not a lot of support for all of that. I was hopeful after this last flooding that there'd be a little better push to get sort of a regional flood barrier, and I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how to do it for sure.
We've been clear, I think, a lot of folks on the VAMN, we see the value of a unified levy district.
Yeah.
And we see that, and it's probably gonna be the future. First of all, you're not gonna find trustees in 5-10 years. It's coercion now, almost. So,
I agree, Lyle. The age of trustees is kind of going away for us. It's very difficult.
And so, but the problem is, that's a medium to longer term goal, and it's definitely there, and I totally agree with it. It's just that we need to get this fixed now.
Yes, you do. There's no question. So anyhow, I'll quit preaching. I'm getting tired of the sound of my voice.
One question,
Are we
Jim,
done?
on Scott's, Schramm's, objection, and John, I might direct this to you. He mentions that the adverse effects, raising the VAMN 1 to 3 feet above pre-11 levels will have adverse effects on Highway 30 and I-29. Now, I don't know that I can speak to Highway 30, you probably can, but I fail to see any way that could affect I-29. In fact, I feel like it'd be at a benefit.
Yeah. So highway, let's start with I-29. I-29, we have several districts that bring water south before it gets to I-29. It's the water coming through the VAMN and cutting straight across it. This being raised and directing the water somewhere else, that water's still gonna come back to the river. It's not going to I-29. So this repair or raising has nothing to do with I-29. Highway 30, Don, you kind of addressed that it never really even gets close. The lowest point that I've been able to locate so far is about 1,005.5, which is about what we're talking about here for the top of the VAMN. If that thing fills up as a level pool, it will back up onto the highway. But it requires it to come in around where it's not supposed to, because the Rand Peterson's not there, fill up this lake on DeSoto, which then still has the low point being the overflow, or the DeSoto Avenue Road at the bottom. There's almost 2 feet, well, excuse me, 1.5 feet from that road elevation to the IDOT Highway 30 low spot. So to say that it's gonna back up water over the highway, I think is an exaggeration, or at least they need to show us what they're seeing that's causing that, because it doesn't make any sense the way they're describing it. The lowest spot is just barely above the road.
There was a lot more water out by the Blair Bridge to deal with than like north of DeSoto Bend in 11. And there's an old riverbed that runs kind of on the east side of DeSoto Bend. And that water actually topped that just natural bank and flowed east towards the interstate. And I mean, John, you remember that, it would have had to get 3-4 feet higher, wouldn't it? Like up on Sealanders and Wolves up in there to even get close to and it's such a wide area that it disperses out on. If it ever did take the highway, there's gonna be a lot of problems, is my opinion from what I saw in 11.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The highway, especially in that area, is at least 2 to 3 feet
We
higher
have a
than the
very
levee
high
we're
ridge
talking
on the
about.
north side of the lake of DeSoto Bend there that matches up the highway. And
And that notwithstanding, John, I talked to you last night and you said this would be fine if DOT wanted to interact with you to check on calculations and see if they show you any better.
Yeah.
You're willing to do that?
Yeah, I can do that. I can reach out to Scott and ask for more information.
Are there any other objections either in the room or on the phone? Any other issues that anybody wants to address? If not, then I think the board needs to proceed. I'd recommend that you have a motion and take a vote and either vote the report up or down. We've previously discussed if there kind of needs to be some more review, maybe with the DOT and with Larry Buss about the elevations. So I'm telling the board now, you can approve this report and direct the engineer to continue to review that and get back to you with what he finds. Because the next stage is going to be, if you approve the report, is to have the engineer draft all the design specs and move forward to a bid. The other issue I guess you need to resolve is borrow, where you're gonna get dirt.
And Jim, just to be clear, the report is amendable if we vote today. It's amendable or not?
This can be amended every day between now and when you're done building it. As more things are found out and more things, it's very typical for the engineer to come to this hearing and then he finds out a number of new things that the landowners bring to the hearing or bring up. That makes sense, John?
Yep.
I mean, the engineers are used to that. Happens all the time, probably every project.
So we can approve the engineer's report as stated today, and we can be open to discussions from anyone that wants to feel they have better information. Will be open.
And then if the engineer sends you an amended report, typically you just see a letter. You can approve that amendment and move that direction. Or sometimes a change order when you're in the middle of construction, that works too. But the board is always in control of it. The board is, you guys right here always control it. Nobody else does.
As soon as we get out of these seats, we become despicable people again. No.
You can be in the basket of deplorables.
Yeah.
With me in Walmart.
No, I'll go back to the farm where nobody listens to me.
Well, I'm ready to get out of here. Isn't there spraying to be done?
Co-op does that.
So Jim, you ready to entertain a motion?
Yeah.
To that effect?
Yeah.
I make the motion to accept the engineer's report as presented today.
Do you have his name on the?
I'm sorry?
Yes.
All right,
Thank
all right.
I would second that motion.
Okay, motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No nays, motion carried.
You're done.
And you say we don't even have to adjourn, Jim? We can,
Well, if you want me to read it to you out of Robert's Rules of Order, I watch a lot of boards and people having meetings, and they always like to have a motion to adjourn. Well, the Rules of Order say the adjournment is just what I always do when I chair. I say, is there any other business? If not, the meeting stands adjourned, bang, bye. You call the
is there
adjournment.
any other business? If not, yeah. Oh, there's a gavel. I don't want to touch that gavel. That's, I might break it. Okay, meeting adjourned.
There you go. That's according to Hoyle.
Thank you to everybody on the phones.
Now,
Hey, Jim,
yes.
is Ike still